Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepless Scientist, a quiet place in the cosmos where your thoughts can unwind and knowledge becomes a soft lullaby for the night. Tonight's journey will take us into a strange and gentle question. What happens to the body when it steps outside of time? Not in the dramatic way of flashing lights and roaring machines, but in a quieter sense. What happens to a human being whose inner rhythms no longer match the world around them? But before you settle in and get cozy, I'd love if you could take a moment to like this video and subscribe, only if you truly find these quiet explorations enjoyable. And when you're ready, leave a comment to let me know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always such a quiet joy to see all the places we gather from, each in our own little slice of time. Now feel free to dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for a softer background hum, and let your shoulders grow a little heavier against the pillow. Tonight, we're not rushing to solve time travel. We are simply going to meet the body as a collection of rhythms and imagine what happens if those rhythms are gently but deeply misplaced. If you place a hand over your chest for a moment, you can feel one of those rhythms right away, the steady beat of your heart. It has been there since before you were born, drumming quietly through every day you have ever lived. Your breathing has a rhythm too, a slow tide of air in and out. There are others you cannot feel as easily, the rise and fall of your body temperature, the slow cycles of hormones, the way your blood pressure shifts between day and night. All of them are tiny, intricate clocks, ticking in soft agreement with one another. And then there is the most familiar clock of all, the one that tells you when you feel awake and when you feel sleepy. This is your circadian rhythm, an internal sense of daytime and nighttime, built from gentle pulses of chemicals in your brain and signals from your eyes. It listens quietly to the world, to light coming through a window in the morning, to the fading of that light in the evening, to meal times, to habits, to the timing of your daily life. Over years, it learns the pattern of your world and hums along with it, like a musician who has played the same song so many times they no longer need to think about the notes. You might notice how fragile this harmony is when you travel between time zones. A flight that carries you across an ocean leaves your body in yesterday while the clock on the wall insists it's already tomorrow. You feel heavy, a little blurred at the edges. You wake up too early or too late. Your appetite forgets what it is supposed to do. That is just a small mismatch, a handful of hours out of place. Even that is enough to make you feel like a stranger in your own day. Now, imagine stretching that feeling until it touches centuries. Imagine a traveller who leaves one moment and arrives in a different era entirely. The calendar, the stars, the shape of the day itself have changed, but inside that person, their inner clocks still believe absolutely in the old world they came from. Their body continues to mark morning and evening according to a sun that may now be in an entirely different position in the sky, filtered through a different atmosphere, over a landscape that remembers a different climate. Their heart still keeps its beat. Their lungs still fill and empty. But the cues that once guided those rhythms, light, temperature, routine, have slipped out of sync. In a way, the chrononaut's body carries a piece of its original time like a sealed room. Inside that room, hormones still rise and fall as if the old day has not ended. Cells still follow their usual pattern of repair and rest. The core temperature still dips at night and climbs toward morning, even if morning no longer matches the sky. For a while, that inner room protects them. It lets the body continue its familiar song. But as the hours and days in the new era pass, the outside world taps gently and then insistently on that door. Light comes in at unexpected times, streaming into the eyes when the brain believes it should be dark. Meals arrive at hours that make no sense to the stomach. Sounds of life, birds, traffic, voices, storms, appear in unfamiliar patterns. The body is patient, but it is not indifferent. It pays very close attention to repeated patterns. Slowly, it begins to ask, which time am I supposed to follow now? There is a quiet tension in that question. If the body clings too tightly to the old rhythm, the traveller will feel always jet-lagged, always slightly tilted, as if their thoughts are walking half a step behind their feet. They will be sleepy when the world is awake, hungry when others have just finished eating, alert in the middle of a quiet night. Their blood pressure may rise at the wrong moments. Their core temperature may peak when it should be cooling. The day inside will slide against the day outside like two gears that no longer quite line up. If the body lets go too quickly, however, there is a different kind of strain. Cells that were used to resting at certain hours now find themselves given work instead. The brain may be asked to concentrate when it expected to wander. The heart may beat a little faster at times that used to be restful. Deep inside, in quiet tissues you never consciously feel, there are little routines of repair, DNA being carefully checked and mended, proteins being folded and refolded, that normally follow a careful schedule. When that schedule is suddenly rewritten, they too must adjust, like a night shift moved abruptly to the afternoon. For our chrononaut, none of this is dramatic on the outside. There are no flashing warnings across their skin, no obvious crackle of science fiction energy. What they feel is something far more familiar, but stretched and deepened, a kind of profound, lingering jet lag that seems to cling even after sleep. A heaviness behind the eyes, thoughts that arrive just a fraction too late, a sense that the day never quite clicks into place, like a key that almost fits a lock but never turns smoothly. It is in this small and human way that the biology of time travel begins, not with impossible machines but with simple clocks, the ones you carry in your chest, in your brain, and in the chemical music flowing through your blood. Before the big questions of paradoxes and altered history, there is this quieter question. How does a body made for one sequence of mornings and evenings learn to live inside another? As we drift deeper into this story, we will follow the chrononaut's body as it enters strange gravity, unfamiliar air, and timescales that bend and stretch. But it all begins here, with a traveller lying awake in a different century, feeling their own heartbeat counting out seconds that no longer belong to the world outside the window. There is a moment, quiet and almost imperceptible, when the body first realises that the world and its own inner rhythm are no longer in agreement. It's not a dramatic shock, not a sudden lurch in the stomach like the drop of a roller coaster. It's closer to the sensation of waking from a nap and not knowing what hour it is, or whether the light outside your window belongs to morning or evening. But for a chrononaut, that sensation does not fade. It lengthens, deepens, and settles into the body like a mist that takes its time before lifting. The human circadian rhythm has always relied on simple cues. Sunlight tells the brain when to release the chemicals that wake you, and darkness signals the gentle cascade that prepares you for rest. Temperature rises and falls predictably throughout the day. Meals arrive at roughly the same hours. Even your social interactions, voices, movements, routines form a quiet pattern the body grows accustomed to. These tiny consistencies create a sense of belonging. They whisper to your biology, "You are here, this is your place in time." But when a traveller steps out of their century and into another, all those cues vanish in an instant. Imagine leaving a winter sun behind and arriving in an era where the air glows warmer or colder, or carries dust from a land that does not yet have a name. Imagine a sky that holds constellations you do not recognise. Imagine light that arrives from a different angle, filtered through an atmosphere still young, or one already grown thin with age. The chrononaut does not simply arrive in another place. They arrive in another rhythm, and their body is left trying to understand a day it never learned. The first sign of this dislocation is often a peculiar heaviness, a mismatch between thought and sensation. The eyes perceive motion in the world, a branch swaying, a shadow shifting, but the brain measures time in the old pattern, so the movement feels slightly too fast or too slow. It's a subtle uncoupling, as if the world's moments are sliding past each other rather than lining up neatly. In neuroscience, there is a phenomenon sometimes described as time stretching, when the brain lingers on one instant a little longer than it should, turning a single heartbeat into something that feels like two. There is no formula for this, nothing to calculate or write down. It is simply the brain measuring time using an internal metronome that suddenly has no external melody to follow. Some chrononauts describe this sensation, at least in the hypothetical stories we imagine, not as dizziness, but as a gentle drifting, like walking on a dock that rocks ever so slightly with the tide. The world is still, but your perception sways. Other times, it feels like your attention is half a second behind your own footsteps, as if your senses are reaching out to catch up with your movements. This is the body's way of reporting that its temporal anchors have been pulled up from the seabed. It still floats, but it no longer knows which direction the tide is meant to carry it. There is also the matter of what the brain expects to see. In your own life, you've probably noticed how waking up in a hotel or someone else's house can create a brief, soft confusion. It takes a moment for your surroundings to feel real. For a chrononaut, the world outside their window may not simply be unfamiliar. It may belong to a time before their culture existed, or long after it has faded. The shapes of buildings, the sounds of tools, the colour of clothing, even the way people move their hands when they speak, all of it becomes evidence that their inner sense of now no longer matches the world's version of now. This mismatch creates a gentle but persistent tension in the mind. The same way a musical note played slightly off-key creates a tension in the ear, even if you can't explain why it sounds wrong. And beneath these quiet confusions, deeper biological processes begin to drift. Hormones that once rose with morning light now rise at the wrong hour. A hormone like melatonin, the chemical that helps you feel sleepy, may spill into your bloodstream too early or too late, like a stagehand arriving on the wrong cue. Cortisol, which normally lifts you into alertness after sunrise, may peak when the sky outside is fading, leaving you bright-eyed at the hour when others prepare for sleep. Body temperature, which usually follows a gentle wave over the day, may no longer match the temperature of the environment around you. You begin to sweat when others feel cool, and you feel cool when others feel warm. These are not dangerous changes, at least not at first. They simply create a sense that the world's moments arrive either too soon or too late. The internal day and the external day pass each other like strangers on a staircase, each glancing back, unsure why the other feels out of place. For the chrononaut, it becomes a quiet, lingering question. Which time does my body belong to now? As the hours pass in this unfamiliar era, the brain begins to search for patterns. It studies the new sunrise, the new sunset. It listens to the rhythms of life in the surrounding world. It tries to find something steady to hold on to, but the search is not easy. In some eras, perhaps an ancient one, the sun may rise through a haze of volcanic dust, dimmer and redder than modern eyes expect. In a far future time, artificial lights may fill the night with soft glows or shifting colours, all of them confusing to a brain that once trusted the clean distinction between day and dark. There is also the question of meals. A body accustomed to eating lunch at midday may suddenly find itself without the food it recognises, or with meals that arrive too early or too late. The stomach is surprisingly punctual. It expects nourishment according to a pattern shaped over years. But in another century, mealtimes may reflect harvest cycles, cultural customs, or artificial schedules the traveller has yet to understand. The body grumbles its confusion in the way only a stomach can. And through all of this, the chrononaut feels a gentle ache that is not quite fatigue, not quite restlessness. It is the biological quiet of a system waiting to be retuned. The internal clocks are still ticking, but they wait for a cue that has not yet arrived. When the body finally begins to adapt, it does so slowly, in small adjustments. A hormone released a few minutes earlier or later, a subtle shift in body temperature, a slight recalibration of the brain's sense of how long a moment lasts. The changes are tiny, but each one moves the traveller a little closer to belonging to this new moment in history. In its own patient way, the body is learning to speak the language of a different time. There is something delicate about memory, something almost shy. It does not behave like a library where thoughts are stored neatly on shelves. It behaves more like a shoreline, with waves that wash moments forward and backward, sometimes smoothing them into clarity, sometimes blurring them so gently that you only notice their softness much later. For most of us, memory is anchored by predictable markers: the sun rising in a familiar sky, the rhythm of days that follow each other in a steady procession, the quiet repetition of routines. These anchors do not just help us remember, they help us understand the sequence of events, the feeling that one moment led to another, and that today is connected to yesterday in a way that makes sense. For a chrononaut, those anchors vanish the moment they step out of their natural era. Imagine waking up in a place where the sounds around you do not belong to any year you've lived. The birds outside your window may be species long extinct in your home century, or species yet to evolve. The air might carry scents from plants that no longer exist, or from soils that have not yet known the footsteps of your ancestors. Even the shape of a simple tool, an axe, a lamp, a chair, might betray the time you're in. And because the brain relies so deeply on familiarity to organise memory, this sudden shift becomes more than disorientation. It becomes a disruption of the mental timeline you've known your whole life. Inside the brain, the region that helps you form new memories, the hippocampus, depends heavily on the stability of your internal rhythms. It is used to encoding experiences based on where you are in your day, whether your body believes it is morning or evening, whether you feel rested or tired, hungry or satisfied. When those rhythms fall out of sync, the way they do when your inner clock no longer matches the outside world, memories begin to take on a dreamy, drifting quality. They are stored, but a little loosely, like pages that were placed into a folder before the ink had fully dried. A chrononaut might experience this in small ways at first. They may forget whether a conversation happened earlier that morning or the previous day, even if only a few hours have passed. They may recall an image, a red sky, the sound of an unfamiliar bird call, without remembering precisely when they saw it. Their mind is still working, still trying to gather and sort impressions, but the usual temporal scaffolding is missing. The brain begins to reach for any pattern it can find, even if that pattern belongs to the century they came from, rather than the century they have entered. And sometimes, the mind tries to merge those patterns together. The chrononaut might look at a landscape that belongs to an ancient age and feel, strangely, as if they have seen it before, even though they know logically they have not. This is not a supernatural feeling. It is simply the brain's attempt to weave a coherent story from pieces that do not quite fit. Memory is not just a record, it is an explanation, a quiet story your brain tells to make sense of experience. When the world presents it with details that match none of its familiar templates, the brain improvises, gently filling in gaps in ways that feel natural, even if they are not accurate. There is a term used in cognitive science for these moments: temporal misbinding. It is not a formula or an equation, just a way of saying that the brain has accidentally tied two moments together that did not truly belong to each other. In everyday life, this might happen when you swear you left your keys on the table when in fact you put them in your coat pocket. For a chrononaut, the effect expands. They might remember speaking with someone at dusk, even though they met that person only in full daylight. Or they might recall a landscape as brighter or foggier than it was, because their internal sense of time of day had quietly slipped a few hours away from the light outside. As the dislocation deepens, another phenomenon may begin to appear, the sense of watching your own thoughts from a slight distance. Not dissociation in the dramatic sense, but something softer, like hearing your voice echo faintly in a hallway. The chrononaut may feel present but not fully anchored, as though the world is real yet slightly underlined with a faint strangeness. The brain is trying to negotiate two realities, the one it knows and the one it has entered. In ordinary life, these negotiations happen when you move to a new city, or hear a language you don't understand, or live abroad long enough that your old routines start to feel like dreams. Time travel exaggerates this feeling, stretching it out like a shadow across the floor. In moments of stress, fear, confusion, hunger, the brain may retreat to memories from the original timeline. It might offer familiar scents or textures, the way your kitchen smelled at sunrise, the hum of traffic outside your bedroom window, the rhythm of a language spoken at home. This is not the mind rejecting the new time, but reminding itself that it belongs somewhere. These echoes of familiarity act as anchors in the storm of experience, soft reminders that the self did not vanish just because the landscape changed. Yet the reverse can also happen. There may be moments when the chrononaut becomes deeply absorbed in the new era, listening to an ancient river, feeling sunlight that has not touched modern skin, or watching stars arranged in constellations that no longer exist in their home age. In those moments, memory begins to adapt. The new environment starts to feel less like a foreign object and more like a puzzle the brain has begun to solve. Small connections form, familiarity grows. The hippocampus learns to map its new surroundings. Slowly, the memories formed in this era begin to feel clearer, more stable. Even so, the mind always remembers that something is out of place. It is like a book with a missing chapter. You can read the pages before and after, and the story still makes sense, but you are always aware that something once belonged in the middle. The chrononaut becomes a living bridge between two times, with memories that stretch backward and forward across centuries, each moment recorded through the lens of a body trying to find its footing in a world that does not share its rhythm. Over time, this delicate balancing act becomes the chrononaut's new normal. Memories continue to form, but they do so with a softness, a slight haze at the edges, as though the mind is always listening for footsteps coming from two different directions. And perhaps in a way, that is exactly what it is doing, standing at the threshold between what once was and what now is, gathering every moment it can, one drifting impression at a time. There comes a moment in every imagined chrononaut's journey when the question shifts from "where am I?" to something quieter and far more intimate. Who am I here? It doesn't arrive with panic. It doesn't come as a sharp break or a dramatic revelation. Instead, it settles like a soft weight across the ribs, an awareness that the person you were in one century must find a way to exist in another. Memory, emotion, and biology, three companions that usually move in harmony, begin to drift slightly apart, each adjusting at a different pace. And in the space between those adjustments, the sense of self flickers gently, like a lantern catching different drafts of wind. Identity, after all, is not a single thing. It's a collection of stories we tell ourselves. It's the habits we trust, the familiar sequences of days, the cultural rhythms we never think about until they are gone. It's the language our thoughts use before we speak. It's the posture our shoulders take when we walk through a doorway that feels like home. The self is not a fixed stone. It is a pattern that repeats and keeps repeating until we recognize it as me. But for a chrononaut, those patterns are suddenly rearranged by the simple fact that the world around them no longer echoes their inner rhythm. Imagine standing in a place where the architecture carries a logic your eyes have never learned. Beams carved with motifs from a civilization long buried, or structures of glass and light from a future that has not yet been imagined. In such a place, even the act of standing still becomes a negotiation between your memories and your senses. Your mind whispers, "This doesn't belong to the story I know," and your senses whisper back, "But this is the story you're in now." Between those two voices, identity bends. Not in the sense of breaking, but in the sense of adapting to a new current. One of the gentlest yet deepest shifts happens inside the realm of language. A chrononaut may hear speech that belongs to another age, the early cadence of a proto-language, or a future dialect shaped by events they themselves may have altered simply by being present. the brain listens intently, trying to find familiar sounds, familiar grammar, familiar echoes of words it once used. Identity is closely tied to the stories we can understand and the ones we can tell. When those stories change shape, even the quiet voice in your mind begins to wonder who it is speaking for. And beneath this linguistic adaptation lies an even more profound biological negotiation. The body carries its own version of identity, a genetic record, silent but persistent. In ordinary life, this record is steady, like a book whose pages remain the same each time you open it. But when the body is placed under unfamiliar stress, whether from altered light cycles, new air compositions, or the deep confusion of its own internal clocks, small changes begin to ripple gently through the molecular level. These aren't dramatic mutations, they are more like adjustments to the margins of the pages. Certain genes begin to whisper more loudly, others quiet down. Patterns of repair and renewal shift, slightly, trying to match the rhythms of a world that does not resemble the one your cells were written for. Scientists sometimes call this gene expression change, but it is easier to imagine it as the body rewriting the tone of its own sentences. Still the same story, but with different emphasis, shaped by the environment it now inhabits. Even deeper within the cell, at the fragile tips of chromosomes, lie structures you can imagine as the soft protective threads on the ends of shoelaces. In biology, these threads help maintain the stability of your genetic material. In the imagined stress of time displacement, they may shorten or lengthen in unusual patterns, reflecting the body's attempt to protect itself from a reality that no longer follows the sequence it expects. This is not expressed as numbers or equations. It is simply the body's quiet conversation with time, answered in the language of its own molecules. As all of this unfolds, the chrononaut's sense of self wavers gently between familiarity and strangeness. They may find that old memories feel more vivid than the new ones, as if the mind is leaning backward to hold on to something steady. Or they may feel almost dreamlike, as if they are watching their own actions from a half step outside, unsure whether the person walking through this new era is truly the same one who left the old. And yet, there is also resilience woven into identity. Humans have always adapted, across climates, across cultures, across landscapes that shift with time. The chrononaut carries that same adaptability. Slowly they begin to craft new routines in the unfamiliar century. A daily walk at the hour the light feels right. A meal taken when hunger finally aligns with the new rhythm. A conversation learned word by word until it becomes familiar. These small acts begin to rebuild the architecture of self, not by erasing the old patterns, but by extending them into the new. Over days or weeks, the chrononaut finds that they begin to recognize themselves again. Not as the person they were in their original time, but as someone larger, someone whose identity stretches across more than one era. They become a composite of every moment they have lived, every place they have learned to stand in, every rhythm their body has slowly made peace with. Perhaps that is the quiet paradox of identity and time travel. Not that the self is lost, but that it grows. It becomes a thread pulled gently through centuries, carrying a sense of continuity, not because the surroundings are familiar, but because the traveller has begun to weave familiarity into whatever surroundings they find. Identity remains, but it expands, becoming a living bridge between the time they came from and the time they now inhabit. In this way, the chrononaut does not dissolve into the centuries. They echo through them, each memory, each adaptation, each small moment of recognition, becoming part of a story that stretches far beyond the boundaries of a single lifetime. Gravity is one of those forces we rarely think about unless something goes wrong. We notice it when we trip over a step, or when we drop a spoon and it clatters loudly on the kitchen floor, or when we feel the familiar heaviness of our body as we settle into bed. But for most of our lives, gravity is simply there, a steady, quiet companion shaping our bones, guiding our muscles and whispering instructions to every part of our body without ever needing to announce itself. For a chrononaut stepping into another era, gravity becomes something entirely different. It becomes a reminder that the ground beneath their feet belongs to a world that evolved without them. On Earth's timeline, gravity has not changed dramatically. The planet's mass remains relatively constant. But what has changed countless times is the way life adapts to that pull. The air has grown lighter or heavier. The climate has shifted between extremes. Plants have thickened or thinned. Animals have grown stronger, larger, taller, faster. And humans, should they appear in eras where our ancestors have not yet evolved or have already changed, are always the strangers in the story. Imagine taking a single step in a prehistoric world where the air is richer in oxygen, where plants grow broader leaves, where insects may be larger because the atmosphere allows them to breathe more easily. Even if Earth's gravity remains familiar, your body moves differently simply because every other part of the environment has adapted to a rhythm you have never known. The ground might feel the same under your feet, but everything above it behaves according to rules written long before or long after your time. The first sensation a chrononaut might feel is a subtle disobedience in the legs. Muscles that have always known the weight of your body suddenly behave as if they are waiting for instructions. You lift your foot and the movement feels normal, but when you set it back down, there may be a faint echo of effort that your balance doesn't quite predict. It's not danger. It's simply that your nervous system learned how to walk in one version of Earth, and your surroundings now expect a slightly different dance. If you have ever walked off a boat and onto solid land after hours on water, you know this feeling, the faint sway that lingers in your legs even though the ground itself is steady. For a chrononaut, that sway doesn't come from travel. It comes from the subtle mismatch between what their senses expect gravity to feel like and how the environment responds to their movement. It becomes more noticeable when the chrononaut bends, lifts, or climbs. Their muscles may fire too strongly or too weakly. Their joints may feel either lighter or heavier than they remember. The bones, which have carried the weight of modern gravity every day of their lives, may feel a slight ache, not from harm, but from unfamiliar work. Bones are living structures that constantly rebuild themselves in response to pressure. In a world where the pace of life, the thickness of air, or the shape of terrain changes even a little, the body begins a quiet recalibration at the cellular level. In microgravity, like aboard the International Space Station, bones begin to thin because they no longer need to resist downward pull. Astronauts lose bone density slowly in orbit, and their bodies learn a kind of floating gait that only works in the airless halls of a spacecraft. When they return to Earth, gravity greets them with a stern reminder that muscles and bones must work again. The chrononaut does not float like an astronaut, but they experience a parallel idea. Their bones are ready for the gravity they know, but the world around them asks them to balance in ways that feel subtly new. In prehistoric times, for example, denser air might create more resistance as you move. Each step feels just a touch heavier, as if the world is asking you to walk through a soft and invisible current. Your chest rises and falls with a different tempo, adjusting to the richer mix of gases. Even your voice might sound slightly altered in the thicker air, carrying in ways you do not expect. If the chrononaut leaps forward in time instead, into a far future where the air has thinned, their body may feel lighter at first, but that lightness comes with a strange fragility. Movements that feel easy also feel less stable. Muscles anticipate resistance that no longer exists. A simple step might overshoot. A turn might feel exaggerated. The nervous system tries to adjust, like a musician retuning an instrument when the acoustics of a hall have changed. This adjustment becomes more complicated when the world introduces new forces, steeper inclines carved by ancient rivers, landscapes shaped by glaciers, or structures from future civilizations that mimic gravity differently through their architecture. The chrononaut does not need equations or scientific notation to feel these changes. They feel them in the cautious way their hands reach for support on a slope that's just a little too slick, or in the slight hesitation before stepping into a space whose height or shape makes their balance work harder. Deep within the body, the vestibular system, tiny structures inside the inner ear that help you sense balance and movement, tries to interpret the new world. These structures rely on a delicate arrangement of fluid and hair-like cells that respond to gravity's pull. When a chrononaut enters an era where sound, air and movement differ even subtly, the inner ear sends signals that do not quite match what the eyes see or what the feet feel. It is not dizziness so much as a soft bewilderment, a quiet sense that the world has been tilted a few degrees off-centre. Then comes the matter of strain. Even small differences in environmental demand can create fatigue that the chrononaut didn't expect. Muscles that are usually strong tire more quickly. The heart works to maintain a rhythm appropriate to the surroundings. Breathing adjusts itself, shallow or deep, depending on the richness or thinness of the air. Nothing is dangerous at first. It is simply the body learning, step by slow step, how to be itself in a time it was not designed for. If the chrononaut stays long enough, adaptation begins. Bones strengthen or soften, muscles grow in the directions they are most needed, and the nervous system rewrites its expectations for balance. The body is patient, it listens, it learns. In this way, the chrononaut becomes a living record of the world they now inhabit, their bones and muscles carrying faint signatures of the era they visit. And perhaps the most remarkable part is how quietly this happens. The chrononaut may not notice the exact day they stop feeling out of place. They simply wake one morning, stretch, and find that their limbs understand the ground beneath them once more. The sway is gone, the hesitation has faded. Gravity, old or new, has become familiar again. The ground has accepted them, and they have accepted the ground. The first breath a chrononaut takes in another era is never just a breath. It is a greeting, a negotiation, and sometimes a gentle shock to a body that has spent its entire life inhaling a familiar recipe of gases. Every era of Earth has had its own atmosphere, shaped by oceans that rose and fell, forests that grew dense or thinned away, volcanic ash drifting through the sky, and the long quiet work of microbes changing the chemistry of the air grain by grain. For a traveller stepping across time, each breath becomes a reminder that the world they once knew is only one version of many. Imagine arriving in a prehistoric Earth, a time when the air held more oxygen than the lungs of modern humans have ever experienced. To breathe in such an atmosphere would feel, at least at first, strangely rich, as if the body could drink more deeply, pulling in a fullness of air that lifts the chest with surprising ease. The oxygen is plentiful, generous, almost eager. Muscles might feel a faint surge of energy. The brain might sharpen for a moment, like a candle flame suddenly fed by a gust. And yet, beneath that initial brightness comes the quieter truth. The body has never been trained for such abundance. For every breath that feels invigorating, another may feel slightly too stimulating, as if the body cannot quite decide whether it is excited or overwhelmed. This is not danger. It is simply the lungs trying to understand a song sung in a different key. Now imagine stepping forward instead of backward, into a far future where the air is thinned, either from climate shifts, technological environments, or countless centuries of slow atmospheric drift. The chrononaut inhales, expecting the familiar fullness, but finds instead a breath that feels incomplete, as though the air has slipped away at the last moment. This thinness is subtle at first, like climbing a gentle hill, but when the next breath comes, the body leans forward slightly, craving more. The heart beats a bit faster, encouraging the lungs to draw in deeper, wider, longer. The traveller may not feel faint, but they feel a soft demand. Breathe more carefully, breathe more attentively, breathe with intention. The lungs are adaptable. They will widen their efforts, stretch their tissues, strengthen the muscles around the ribs. But in those early moments, the chrononaut becomes acutely aware of something that was once unconscious, the simple act of drawing in the world. Beyond the thickness or thinness of air lies another layer of complexity, what the air contains. Every era of Earth carries its own invisible signature. Pollen from ancient plants, particles from volcanoes that erupted long before any human civilization existed, spores from fungi that no longer grow in the modern world, and even proteins drifting in the air that your immune system has never learned to greet politely. A chrononaut might take a breath and feel a faint itch behind the nose, a soft sting in the throat, or a heaviness beneath the eyes. These sensations are not warnings, they're introductions. The immune system is being presented with unfamiliar guests at its doorstep. Some of these airborne strangers are harmless, others are merely surprising. A few might be confusing, triggering the same response you feel when spring arrives early and the air fills with pollen your body wasn't expecting. Breathing ancient air or future air is like stepping into a house where every window opens in a different direction, letting in breezes that carry scents and whispers your senses have never learned to interpret. Consider prehistoric plant life. During eras of towering ferns and enormous trees, the air would have held different oils, different fragrances, different allergens. The chrononaut's lungs, trained by plants that evolved much later, might react with a slight tightness, not unlike standing too close to a dense field of wildflowers on a windy day. In the future, engineered forests or unfamiliar hybrids might release particles that drift through the air with equal strangeness, triggering soft coughs as the body attempts to understand what exactly has arrived. Beyond plant life, the air also carries tiny organisms, harmless ones, curious ones, and occasionally ones that the immune system views with suspicion. Microbes themselves do not need to be dangerous to cause discomfort. Sometimes simply being new is enough to confuse the body. The chrononaut's immune system might respond with caution, sending gentle waves of inflammation through the sinuses or throat, like a polite but firm guard asking for identification at the gate. And then there is the matter of aerosols, those tiny floating particles produced by the environment. In the distant past, volcanic activity was far more common. A single breath might contain traces of minerals that today's lungs rarely encounter. In the far future, aerosol signatures may be shaped by technologies we cannot yet imagine. Cleaner perhaps, or stranger, or filled with particles that behave differently under sunlight. The chrononaut inhales all of this, feeling each breath as part of a world that evolves separate from them. Yet the body is not fragile. It has always been shaped by air, by humidity, temperature, scent, flow, and the countless drifting particles that ride alongside oxygen. The lungs are extraordinarily resilient, capable of learning new patterns, strengthening certain pathways and softening others. With each day spent in the new era, the chrononaut's breathing becomes more natural. The lungs adjust their responses. The immune system decides which particles to treat as familiar. Even the tiny hairs within the airways shift their rhythm to suit the currents of this new world. In this slow negotiation, the chrononaut begins to find a home in the unfamiliar. The breaths that once felt heavy begin to feel grounding. The thin air that once demanded effort becomes invigorating. The scents that once stirred confusion begin to weave themselves into memory. The smell of a fern that grew in an era untouched by cities, or the faint metallic tang of a future breeze shaped by distant machines. There is something almost poetic in the way the body adapts. Breath is life, but it is also acceptance. With every inhale, the chrononaut learns something about the era they have entered. With every exhale, they leave behind a little of the unease that came with arrival. And somewhere between those two movements, between taking in the world and offering something back, the traveller becomes part of the time they inhabit. The air, in its own quiet way, welcomes them. The immune system is one of the quietest companions you carry through life. It does its work without asking for attention, moving through your body like a watchful guardian who knows every street, every doorway, every familiar face inside your internal world. It recognizes the signature of each cell you were born with, the subtle chemistry of each organ, and the harmless hints of microbes you grew up alongside. Most of the time, you never notice it working. It rises to meet danger before you even feel the first spark of fever. It settles conflicts before they reach your awareness. It keeps the borders of your body steady and safe. But when a chrononaut steps into a different era, long before or far after the time they belong to, that guardian finds itself standing at the gates of a city it no longer recognizes. The air in this new century carries particles the immune system has never been trained to interpret. The water holds microorganisms that evolved along entirely different branches of the tree of life. Even the soil might hide tiny creatures that disappeared millions of years before the chrononaut's time, or have not yet appeared. Some of these organisms are harmless, others are simply unknown, and to an immune system, unknown can feel like a whisper of danger. Imagine walking through a prehistoric forest where towering plants release spores that no human living today has ever inhaled. These spores drift toward the chrononaut's skin, eyes, and lungs. The immune system looks at them with the same confusion you might feel if someone began speaking in a language made of sounds you have never heard. It doesn't know whether to ignore the newcomers, greet them, or sound an alarm. So it chooses caution. A bit of swelling here, a puff of inflammation there, a soft tightening in the throat or sinuses. Not fear, just uncertainty. And then there are the microorganisms that share the world without invitation. In the modern world, your immune system knows the patterns of familiar bacteria, the textures of your own microbiome, the countless microscopic symbionts that live on your skin and inside your gut. But in another era, those friendly companions are no longer the majority. They become foreigners in a crowd of species that evolved under different climates, different chemical pressures, different predators and prey. If the chrononaut travels to the deep past, they may encounter bacteria that vanished long ago, their entire lineages erased by extinction or transformed beyond recognition by evolution. These ancient microbes moved through ecosystems no human body has ever touched. They might carry sugars or proteins shaped by environments that humans have never adapted to. A prehistoric microbe might be no more harmful than a petal brushing your arm, yet the immune system may bristle at its presence simply because it does not match any familiar pattern. The reverse is also true. In the future, microbes may evolve traits that modern immune systems have never practiced defending against. Not necessarily stronger or more dangerous, just different. A slightly altered shape, a new surface molecule, a behavior molded by environments and technologies that have shifted the ecological balance. Even a small shift can confuse the immune system. A microbe that future bodies easily tolerate may send the chrononaut's defenses into a cautious standoff. And perhaps the most intricate part of this immune shock lies within the chrononaut's own body, the microbiome. Your microbiome is a vast community of microorganisms, bacteria, fungi, and tiny life forms that live with you like long-term roommates. They help digest food, train your immune system, protect your skin, and even send gentle signals that influence mood. Over time, this community becomes tailored to the environment around you. It learns the chemistry of your food, the quality of your air, the rhythm of your life. But when the chrononaut leaps across centuries, they carry a microbiome that belongs to a different world entirely. This creates an odd mismatch. The microbes living inside and on the chrononaut begin interacting with an environment that does not understand them. The soil they step on, the plants they touch, the animals they pass, all carry their own microscopic companions, shaped by different evolutionary pressures. Each microbial world greets the chrononaut's biome like two crowds meeting at a border without translation. This mismatch can create small disturbances, like stomach upset when the gut bacteria struggle to interpret unfamiliar food chemistry, or skin irritation when microbes on the surface encounter particles they interpret as threats, or a gentle sense of fatigue when the immune system must spend extra energy deciding which signals are harmless and which need attention. Very rarely, the mismatch might escalate for reasons that aren't dramatic but simply biological. If the Chrononaut's microbiome is less suited to the new environment, it may struggle to maintain balance, a feeling not unlike the mild discomfort you experience after travelling to a different country and eating food your body is not used to. Conversely, a particularly dominant prehistoric microbe may try to colonize the Chrononaut's skin or lungs more aggressively, prompting the immune system to raise its defenses with quiet determination. This is not a war, it is a negotiation, the same negotiation that has shaped life on Earth for billions of years. Every species, every microbe, every immune system learns how to coexist through trial, error, and adjustment. Over time, the Chrononaut's immune system will adapt. It will learn which unfamiliar microbes are harmless. It will adjust its reactions to the spores, pollens, and particles drifting through the air. The microbiome will shift, adding new members, letting go of old ones, becoming something that belongs partly to the traveller and partly to the new era. There is a quiet poetry in this adaptation. The Chrononaut's body becomes a meeting place for different times, a small intersection where ancient and modern lifeways blend together. The immune system, ever watchful, adjusts its standards and redefines what it considers safe. It broadens its vocabulary of recognition, learning the scents and signatures of life forms that lived before or after the century it once called home. And through this slow dance of recognition and adjustment, the Chrononaut begins to feel less like an intruder in a strange era. Their breath grows easier, their skin feels calmer, their stomach settles, their body stops asking so many questions. It is the immune system's way of whispering, "I know this place now. You are no longer a stranger." Hunger is one of the most ancient instincts carried by the human body. It is simple, direct, and honest. Yet beneath that simplicity lies an elegant network of signals, hormones rising and falling, stomach muscles stretching and relaxing, enzymes waiting like quiet craftsmen for the materials they know how to work with. Everything you eat, from the softest fruit to the hardest bread, passes through a system that has spent years learning the chemistry of your era. Your digestive tract, your liver, your blood. They all understand the food of your time the way a musician understands a familiar melody. When a chrononaut steps into another century, hunger becomes something more complicated, something tinged with uncertainty. It is not just about finding nourishment, it is about finding familiarity in a world that may not offer any. Imagine walking through a prehistoric valley where plants grow in shapes you've only seen in textbooks or imagination. Thick stems, broad fronds, strange bulbs rising from the soil like small green lanterns. These plants were never part of the evolution of modern humans. Their chemistry developed without any connection to our digestive enzymes. Some might taste sweet, others bitter, others earthy in a way that confuses the senses. The chrononaut might pluck a leaf and rub it between their fingers, noticing a scent that is almost familiar but not quite. The body waits, cautious, listening for the old signals it expects, a reminder of food it once knew. But the signals do not come. When food from another era enters the mouth, the senses become scouts. Taste buds send rapid messages. Is this bitterness dangerous? Is this sweetness a trick? In modern life, these reflexes are subtle. In a different era, they become sharper, more attentive. A prehistoric plant may contain compounds that taste like the ancestors of modern vegetables, yet carry slight variations, an extra molecule here, a missing one there, that change how the body interprets them. It's like hearing a song that resembles one you love, but played on unfamiliar instruments. Once the food reaches the stomach, another negotiation begins. Digestive enzymes, those tiny, tireless workers, are specialists. They were shaped by the food your ancestors relied on for hundreds of generations. If the chrononaut eats something from a world where human agriculture did not yet exist, the enzymes may hesitate, unsure how to break apart the molecules they've been given. It's not a dramatic failure. It's more like a craftsman receiving a tool they have not used before. They try, they adjust, and sometimes they struggle. This can lead to a gentle heaviness in the belly, a sense that the food is sitting longer than it should. The stomach may send confused messages, soft cramps, odd gurgles, a feeling of being full without being satisfied. A prehistoric fruit might contain fibres thicker or tougher than the chrononaut expects. A root may hold starches that modern digestion does not handle smoothly. Even water, drawn from an ancient stream rich with minerals that no longer exist in today's rivers, might taste metallic or earthy in unfamiliar ways. And then there are the future foods. Imagine stepping into a distant century where the chemistry of nourishment has been shaped by technologies unknown to our time. Crops might have been engineered to survive climates we cannot yet imagine. Their flavours could be milder or stronger, richer or more subdued. Proteins might be structured differently, shaped for efficiency or sustainability. A future vegetable might offer nutrients in a form modern bodies take longer to absorb. A future grain might break down faster or slower, giving the chrononaut energy in patterns that feel unpredictable. Some future foods may be too refined, leaving the digestive system searching for fibre it expects. Others might be too complex, filled with compounds meant for digestive tracts that adapted over centuries. Eating such foods might give the chrononaut sudden bursts of energy, followed by unexpected dips, as if the body is learning a new rhythm it didn't ask for. Yet hunger insists. The body cannot pause its needs simply because the world has changed, so it begins to adapt. Deep inside the stomach and intestines, bacteria from the chrononaut's microbiome attempt to interpret these new foods. Some microbes flourish in the presence of unfamiliar nutrients, breaking them down eagerly. Others falter, struggling in the presence of compounds they were never meant to encounter. Over days or weeks, the microbiome shifts, shedding some members, welcoming others from the environment. This slow reshaping affects everything from mood to metabolism, creating subtle changes in appetite, energy levels, and even sleep. There are moments when the chrononaut might crave foods from their own century, not just for flavour, but for comfort. The body remembers what it knows, a certain balance of sweetness and bitterness, the warmth of grains that have been part of human diets for thousands of years, the saltiness we've grown used to, the familiar texture of fruit ripened under familiar suns. When none of those exist in the new era, a soft ache can settle in the mind, a longing not just for nourishment, but for belonging. But the body is patient, it listens, it learns. Slowly the chrononaut begins to recognize patterns in the new world. A certain root that once caused discomfort now feels easier to digest. A fruit that tasted too strong now seems refreshing. A future grain that once caused energy crashes now fits more comfortably into the body's rhythm. The microbiome adapts, enzymes adjust, hormones shift their timing. Little by little, the traveller's digestive system stops resisting and begins collaborating. And once that collaboration begins, the chrononaut experiences something remarkable. They become part of this era, not just a visitor. Food is the most intimate way to accept a world. With each meal, the traveller absorbs pieces of the time they inhabit. Nutrients shaped by climates they never lived through, minerals carried by continents in different positions, water filtered through soils that remember ancient forests or future oceans. Eating becomes a way of saying, I am here now. And the body, in its quiet wisdom, answers, then let me learn how to live here. There is a delicate rhythm inside every cell of your body. an invisible pulse that runs far deeper than your heartbeat, deeper even than your breath. It is the rhythm of renewal. Every day, countless cells repair themselves, divide, rest, and begin again. Some replace themselves quickly, like those in your skin or stomach. Others linger for years, but all of them follow a kind of quiet calendar, an internal sense of how old they are and how much time has passed. When a chrononaut steps into another era, that internal cellular calendar becomes one of the first things to feel the strangeness of time moving differently. Most of us think of aging as something that happens on the outside, lines forming gently on the face, strength shifting in the muscles, hair turning silver. But aging begins in the tiny structures within each cell, shaped by the slow, steady drift of chemical reactions and the careful copying of genetic material. And within the nucleus of the cell, at the tips of each chromosome, lie structures that are soft in purpose even if we never see them. Protective threads that keep DNA stable during division. You can imagine these threads like the soft caps on the end of shoelaces, pieces that prevent the lace from fraying. In biology, these soft caps shorten a little each time a cell makes a copy of itself. Over the course of decades, they act like a gentle clock, counting the number of times the cell is renewed. Now imagine what happens when a chrononaut experiences time at a different pace. In a world where days feel longer or shorter, where light arrives at unexpected moments, where the rhythm of sleep and wakefulness is mismatched, the body can become confused about the rate at which its cellular clock should tick. The protective caps on chromosomes may shorten faster or slower, not because the traveller is aging dramatically, but because the signals that normally guide cellular renewal, light cycles, hormone flows, temperature changes, have slipped out of sequence. This does not mean the chrononaut suddenly grows older. The body is not fragile enough for such sharp changes. Rather, it means cells begin to question the schedule they have always trusted. A cell in the skin might renew itself sooner than expected. A cell in the immune system might linger longer before dividing. The balance shifts not in a dramatic leap, but in a quiet drifting of internal expectations. In certain theoretical scenarios involving extreme velocities, such as travelling near the speed of light, time for the traveller may pass at a different rate than for the world outside. This concept is usually described with symbols in physics, but here it is enough to imagine a traveller living through one heartbeat while the world outside experiences 2 or 3 or more. In such cases, the chrononaut cells age according to their own experience of time. Even if the rest of the universe moves more quickly, their biological age could drift gently away from the age of the world they return to. This softer explanation captures the emotional truth without invoking equations. The traveller's body holds on to the pace of time it lived through, no matter what the clocks of the universe say. Another layer of complexity comes from the subtle damage that accumulates in cells over time. Radiation, stress, and everyday metabolic activity all leave small marks on DNA. In the chrononaut's journey, this damage may become more unpredictable. In the deep past, cosmic radiation might reach the surface of the Earth differently, filtered through an atmosphere that was younger, thicker, or filled with volcanic dust. In the far future, artificial environments or altered magnetic fields might change how radiation moves through the air. Instead of thinking of radiation as a dangerous shower of particles, it is easier to imagine it as tiny, ghost-like sparks passing through the body, harmless most of the time, but occasionally brushing against a cell in a way that leaves a faint mark. Usually cells repair these marks with quiet precision. But under the strain of temporal dislocation, that repair process may hesitate for a moment, uncertain about when exactly it is supposed to act. These small hesitations accumulate, creating a sense that the body is aging in a pattern that does not match the world around it. There are also the hormones that help regulate the body's rhythm of aging. Cortisol, melatonin, growth factors, they all rise and fall according to the day's progression. If the chrononaut's internal day no longer matches the external day, these hormones begin to drift, like musical instruments playing slightly out of tune with the rest of the orchestra. The body still plays the right melody, but the timing feels irregular. Over weeks or months, this irregularity influences sleep, energy levels, tissue repair, and even mood. Yet despite all of this, the chrononaut does not fall apart. The body is neither reckless nor delicate, it is adaptable. If time feels faster in the environment, the body gradually speeds up its renewal cycles, aligning cell division and hormone release with the new world's cues. If time feels slower, the body eases into a more restful pace. Cells begin to divide less often, conserving energy. The protective caps on chromosomes shorten a little more slowly, as if the body is learning to savor the moments instead of rushing through them. This adaptability is not perfect, but it is graceful. Over time, the chrononaut becomes a kind of hybrid, carrying the biological habits of their original era, layered with the adjustments their body made in the new one. Their cellular rhythm becomes a blend of timelines, a quiet choreography shaped by the dance between internal and external time. Some travellers might even experience moments of deep clarity, where their perception sharpens in a way that feels unusual. When the body's timing shifts, the brain may enter states where memory becomes vivid, or moments feel elongated, or the world seems unusually still. These sensations are simply the mind adapting to the new tempo of cellular life. They are not supernatural. They are the slow rewiring of a body learning to live where it was never meant to stand. In this sense, the chrononaut's aging is not a threat. It is a story, one written in the language of cells adjusting, DNA listening, and the body quietly asking, how fast should I move in this place? How slow should I rest? Which version of time should I call my own? And in answering those questions, the traveller becomes something rare. A person who has learned to age across timelines, carrying the rhythm of one century into the heartbeat of another. Deep inside the nucleus of every cell in your body lies a structure so small you could spend a lifetime trying to imagine its scale. And yet this tiny, spiralling thread holds the instructions for everything you are. The colour of your eyes, the way your heart beats, the rhythm of your immune system, the contours of your memories. This thread, your DNA, endures quietly through every breath, every sunrise, every moment of your life. It is patient, but it is not invulnerable. And when time itself begins to shift around a chrononaut, DNA becomes one of the most delicate witnesses to that change. In the familiar world, DNA experiences a steady stream of small disruptions every day. Tiny chemical bonds break. Strands twist in ways they shouldn't. Particles from sunlight or minerals, or even the body's own metabolism leave faint marks like footprints on a quiet path. Normally, a cell's repair systems, its caretakers, move swiftly to mend these marks. They check the DNA as if reading a beloved book, ensuring no page is missing, no line is smudged. But place that same cell in another era, and suddenly the caretakers find themselves reading under different lighting, sometimes brighter, sometimes dimmer, sometimes coloured with a tone they've never known. In ancient Earth, the atmosphere was not the gentle filter it is today. At certain points in prehistory, the sky held more volcanic ash, or less ozone, or clouds of mineral dust carried by winds that travelled across continents that no longer exist. In those ages, a chrononaut's DNA would meet particles carried by the air that could drift through the body like tiny, invisible embers. These particles aren't always dangerous, but they are unfamiliar. The repair systems, trained by modern air and modern sunlight, would hesitate as they try to interpret these marks. The hesitation itself becomes a form of strain. In the far future, the air may carry a different kind of signature, perhaps shaped by advanced technology, or filtered through new ecosystems, or saturated with forms of radiation that were rare in ancient times. Not the frightening kind of radiation people imagine, but the subtle, persistent drizzle of high energy, particles that space agencies today study carefully. These particles can pass through a body without leaving a scar, but occasionally they touch a strand of DNA just enough to make a whisper of change. You can think of these particles like tiny needles made of light, drifting silently through space and time. When they touch DNA, they sometimes leave behind a faint kink, like a page in a book folded at the corner. Usually the cell unfolds the page quickly, but in a chrononaut, someone already immersed in a world whose day-night rhythm, gravity or air chemistry confuses the body, those repairs might not follow their usual schedule. The cell might pause for a moment it doesn't normally pause, unsure whether this world's dawn and dusk are the signals it once trusted. And it is not only the environment that affects the DNA. Time itself, accelerated, stretched or fragmented, creates its own peculiar tug on the body. In a world where time feels faster, cells may divide more often to keep pace with the signals they receive. More division means more chances for tiny copying mistakes. Not catastrophic mistakes, just small variations, the kind that accumulate gradually and shape the texture of aging. In a world where time feels slower, cells may delay repair cycles, leaving small marks on DNA untouched for longer. Again, not disastrous, but different. A new rhythm imposed on microscopic processes that normally hum along with dependable precision. These rhythmic mismatches between the world's tempo and the body's internal clocks create a sort of biological echo. DNA repair systems rely on cues, the rise of certain hormones at dawn, the cooling of the body at night, the timed release of molecules that act like soft work signals. But in a foreign era, dawn may come when the body expects midnight. Temperature may fluctuate in unpredictable patterns. The chrononaut's internal signals may fall out of step with environmental cues, leaving DNA repair without the familiar cadence it depends on. This is particularly noticeable with forms of damage that the body usually mends at night. In modern life, nighttime is when the brain and body engage in the quiet maintenance that keeps cells healthy. But if a chrononaut's sense of night is out of sync, if their internal night arrives while the sky outside burns with afternoon light, those repair cycles become confused. It's like trying to sleep in a bright room without curtains. The body tries its best, but the quality of rest is never quite the same. There's also the matter of epigenetic drift. Epigenetics is a soft, gentle layer of control over DNA, a set of chemical marks that tell genes when to speak and when to stay silent. These marks respond to environment, stress, diet, and even emotional states. When a chrononaut arrives in a different time, their epigenetic patterns respond like sensitive instruments in a room full of new vibrations. New air, new microbes, new rhythms of light, all of these send faint ripples through the epigenetic landscape. Over time, the marks shift, slightly rewiring gene activity, not rewriting the story of the DNA, but adjusting the tone in which it is read. This is something we've observed in astronauts. When humans spend long periods away from Earth, in microgravity, surrounded by unfamiliar radiation, certain sections of their DNA begin to behave differently. Some genes quiet down, others speak up. Some repair pathways grow more active. Others become more hesitant. It isn't damage in the frightening sense, it is adaptation. The body listens to the environment and responds, much like a traveller adjusting their posture when walking into the wind. The chrononaut experiences a similar adjustment, but shaped by time rather than distance. Their DNA is still theirs, still intact, still faithful to the story it has always written. But it now writes that story with a slight accent picked up from another era. And in this quiet reshaping, something remarkable emerges. The chrononaut cells begin to reflect the history of the world they have entered. Their DNA carries tiny signatures from a time they were never meant to inhabit. Marks left by ancient sunlight, by future winds, by atmospheres that belong equally to the past and the possible. It is not a loss of identity. It is the body learning to survive across timelines, a kind of molecular wandering. a gentle negotiation between a person and the centuries they walk through. And though the chrononaut never sees these changes, they feel them in subtle ways. A shift in how quickly they recover from fatigue, a different quality in their sleep, a new steadiness or weariness in their muscles, tiny echoes of the time they now inhabit, resonating within their cells. Their DNA becomes a quiet traveller too, moving, adapting, listening to the era, and learning how to belong to it, one gentle mark at a time. Healing is one of the body's oldest talents. Long before humans understood medicine, long before the first herb was crushed into a paste, or the first bandage was wrapped around a wound, the body already knew how to knit itself back together. A cut on the skin invites cells to gather at the edges, stitching a new surface. A bruise sends quiet messages to clear away damaged tissue. Even a broken bone begins to rebuild itself almost immediately, as if guided by an invisible memory of its original shape. This choreography of repair happens every day in ways we barely notice. It follows the rhythm of our internal clocks, the rise of certain hormones in the morning, the calming dip of stress signals at night, the cycles of rest that give cells the time they need to mend. But when a chrononaut steps into a different era, the quiet timing behind these repairs is one of the first things to drift out of alignment. Imagine a small injury, a scrape on the knee, a shallow cut on the palm. In everyday life, such wounds follow a familiar pattern. They sting, they swell slightly, they redden, then slowly fade as new skin grows. But in a time where the world's rhythm does not match the chrononaut's own, this healing may feel stretched or compressed, as if the wound is unsure of how quickly it is supposed to fade. Part of this comes from the environment. Ancient Earth carried different bacteria, different minerals in the soil, different particles drifting in the air. A wound exposed to that world meets microorganisms shaped by ecosystems the human immune system has never encountered. Not all harmful, many simply unknown. The immune system, already cautious from the shock of new pollen and new air, becomes even more attentive around an injury. It sends extra layers of inflammation, extra waves of protective cells, trying to anticipate threats it cannot yet recognize. This added vigilance can slow the early phases of healing, like a cautious craftsman taking extra time to inspect each tool before beginning. In the far future, the opposite might occur. If the environment is highly sanitized or influenced by advanced technologies, a wound might be exposed to fewer immediate microbes. The immune system, suddenly less busy, might respond more quickly but with less direction, repairing tissue in patterns it has not practiced before. The healing process might feel brisk at first, yet unpredictable. A wound that closes quickly one day may feel slower the next, as if the body is experimenting with new techniques in a new age. Gravity also plays a quiet role in healing. Blood flow changes subtly when the body is not moving in the ways it has always known. In a world where gravity feels slightly different, whether through environmental factors, terrain, or the body's perception, blood may pool or disperse differently around a wound. In microgravity, for example, wounds are known to heal more slowly at first because the cells that normally gather quickly take longer to orient themselves. A chrononaut in a time with unusual atmospheric conditions might experience something similar. A simple scrape might remain puffy a little longer, or a bruise might spread in unexpected directions. Temperature and humidity also shape the process. In a prehistoric world thick with moisture, wounds might remain damp longer, encouraging slower scab formation. In a dry future climate, scabs might form quickly but crack easily, requiring the body to repeat small steps of repair. The environment becomes not an enemy but a quiet collaborator, sometimes helping, sometimes complicating, always influencing. Then there is the deeper layer of healing, the work that happens inside the cells themselves. Every repair depends on signals, chemical messengers that tell tissues when to rest, when to divide, when to grow. These signals normally follow the circadian rhythm, with certain repair processes peaking during the biological night. But if the chrononaut's internal night no longer matches the world around them, if their body expects darkness while the sky burns with late morning light, the signals become confused. A cell might begin repairing DNA at a moment when it's also being asked to divide. A hormone that usually calms inflammation might release too early or too late. The alignment between rest and repair, the deep partnership that keeps wounds healing cleanly, begins to drift. This drift can create a peculiar sensation for the chrononaut, the feeling that their body is healing, but hesitantly. A cut might close more slowly than expected, not in a concerning way, but in a way that feels as if the tissues are waiting for a cue they cannot quite find. The itchiness of healing might linger longer, or the area around the wound might feel warmer than usual as the immune system works over time to interpret its surroundings. Yet sometimes the opposite happens. In moments when the chrononaut's internal rhythm briefly aligns with a pattern in the new era, perhaps during a certain hour of twilight or a moment when the temperature dips in just the right way, healing may suddenly accelerate. A wound that seems stalled might improve noticeably overnight. The body, relieved to find a familiar rhythm, takes advantage of the alignment. The variability itself becomes a kind of signature of time travel healing, a process that waxes and wanes, not broken, but unsteady in the presence of unfamiliar cues. Inside deeper tissues, muscles, tendons, even bones, this pattern continues. A strained muscle may feel tight for longer, relaxing only when the chrononaut enters a state of calm that matches their original body clock. A small fracture may take slightly longer to knit in an era where movement patterns differ from what the body knows. Even the chronic aches that sometimes accompany old injuries may flare or fade depending on the surrounding climate, the shape of the land, or the alignment of internal and external time. Still, the body is determined. It recognizes damage instinctively. It repairs instinctively. That instinct does not vanish simply because the sun rises at the wrong hour, or the air tastes faintly of minerals long vanished from the modern world. Over days or weeks, the chrononaut begins to notice something unexpected. Their body, once hesitant, begins to learn. The immune system quiets down, spending less energy on overreaction. Repair processes become smoother. Tissue begins to adapt to the demands of the environment. The internal clocks, while still imperfectly aligned, find small anchors in the new world, the cooling of evening winds, the dimming of prehistoric light through dense fern canopies, or the pulsing hum of future cities. Healing becomes possible again, not because the world grows friendlier, but because the body grows wiser. By the time the chrononaut has lived long enough in this new era, their wounds heal almost as they once did. Not exactly, but close enough that they no longer notice the lingering hesitations. The body, in its quiet persistence, writes a new chapter of survival into its memory. A chapter that belongs to this era, shaped by its air, its gravity, its microbes, its rhythms. And in learning to heal here, the chrononaut becomes something more than a visitor. They become part of the time itself, woven into its biology, stitched into its quiet pulse. There is a quiet contract between your senses and the world around you. Your eyes gather light, your ears catch vibrations, your skin feels the softness or sharpness of what you touch, and somewhere in the dark spaces of your brain, all of these signals are stitched together into a steady picture of reality. Normally, this picture is so smooth that you forget it is even being assembled. Moments appear in the correct order. Movements flow naturally. You reach out a hand, and your mind meets the gesture at the exact instant your body performs it. But when a chrononaut arrives in another era, one whose rhythms, cues, and patterns of time differ subtly or dramatically from the world they come from, that delicate contract begins to slip. The first sign is often not dramatic. It may feel like the chrononaut is walking through a place where the air is just a fraction heavier or the light just a fraction slower, even if neither is true. Their eyes see a leaf falling, but their mind interprets the movement with a slight delay, as though the leaf has been painted onto the world twice, once in the present and once in a faint echo just behind it. Or they hear footsteps approaching and feel a momentary uncertainty about whether the sound belongs to someone ahead of them or someone just out of sight a heartbeat behind. This experience is called perceptual desynchronization, though the term itself is far too clinical for what it actually feels like. To the traveller, it feels like standing inside a scene where their senses haven't quite agreed on the timing. Shadows may shift before the objects that cast them. A hand waving in greeting may seem to begin its arc a fraction of a second before the rest of the arm follows. Even their own movements may feel strangely doubled, as though the intention and the action do not arrive at the same time. If you have ever watched a video where the audio lags behind the speaker's lips, you have felt a gentler version of the chrononaut's confusion. But imagine that experience not as an annoyance on a screen, but as a moment woven into the fabric of reality. Part of this begins with vision. Sight is incredibly sensitive to timing. Your eyes continually send rapid bursts of information to the brain, and the brain must predict what will happen next to make sense of motion. When the world's rhythms differ from the chrononaut's internal pace, these predictions become a little less certain. The brain leans too far forward, or lingers a little too long on previous moments. It is like walking while reading a slightly outdated map, still useful, but just behind the world it is meant to describe. The ears have their own way of slipping. Sound moves differently through air depending on its composition, humidity, and temperature. In a prehistoric age, the air may be thicker, carrying sound farther, but with a softer edge. In a far future era, the air may be thin or engineered, transmitting sound with a clarity that feels too sharp. These differences change how quickly the chrononaut hears things, and how their brain syncs sound with sight. A snapping twig might feel distant even when it is close. Voices might seem to echo even in open air. The rustling of plants might arrive a beat early, as if the world is whispering ahead of its own actions. And then there is the sense of balance, one of the quietest yet most essential senses. Inside the inner ear is a set of tiny structures filled with fluid and sensitive hairs that detect movement. Every turn of your head, every step you take, every shift in your posture sends messages through these structures. But in a world where gravity, terrain, or atmospheric pressure differs, even slightly, the fluid inside the inner ear behaves in ways the brain was not expecting. The chrononaut might turn their head and feel as if the turn continues just a moment longer than the movement itself, or they may begin walking and feel as though the floor is moving beneath them at a pace just slightly out of sync. The balance system tries to correct this, but the corrections themselves may overshoot or arrive late, creating a cycle of small mismatches that the traveller must quietly adjust to. These mismatches do not cause panic. They cause a drifting sensation, a soft, unsteady feeling, like standing on a piece of ground that remembers being part of a ship. The chrononaut's body tries to adapt by leaning more carefully, stepping more deliberately, or slowing their movements until the world catches up. This temporal flux of perception grows more noticeable during moments of stillness. When the chrononaut stands motionless and listens, the world feels as if it is holding its breath. But their mind keeps ticking along with the rhythm it brought from its original era. The mismatch between stillness and internal tempo can create a gentle sense of floating, as though the traveller exists a half step outside everything they see. And yet, there is something beautiful in this. The chrononaut begins to witness the world in a way most people never do. They notice the slight delay between breeze and branch, the faint lag between step and echo, the tiny separation between intention and motion. These observations do not frighten them. They invite a kind of quiet curiosity, a sense of being present in the mechanics of experience itself, witnessing not just the world, but the stitching together of perception. Over time, the brain adapts. It adjusts its predictions, recalibrates its timing, and learns the tempo of the new era. Visual signals begin to align again. Sounds regain their harmony with movement. Balance feels steadier. The echo of perceptual lag fades, replaced by a new sense of trust. A chrononaut who has lived long enough in the new time may even forget the early discomfort. Their brain becomes fluent in the rhythms of this era, interpreting shadows and sounds with confidence. The slipping moments disappear, replaced by a seamless new picture of reality. The senses have found their agreement again. The contract between the world and the traveller is renewed. And perhaps the most remarkable part is this. In learning a new rhythm, the chrononaut discovers how flexible perception truly is. They learn that reality is not delivered to the mind all at once, but assembled continuously, gently, moment by moment. And that assembly can shift, stretch, and settle into entirely new forms without breaking. The traveller does not simply witness the world, they witness themselves adjusting to it. And in that adjustment, they become part of the era, woven into the pace of its light, its air, its sound, and its time. A human body is in many ways a creature of habit. It leans toward routine, toward patterns it can predict, toward the steady repetition of days and nights. But beneath that preference lies a quiet truth that has allowed our species to survive ice ages, migrations, droughts, storms, and countless shifting landscapes. The body is astonishingly adaptable. Every system within you, your cells, your organs, your brain, carries the memory of change. It remembers how to bend without breaking. When we imagine a chrononaut, someone who moves not just across landscapes but across centuries, it's tempting to picture them as fragile in the face of such a disorienting leap. Yet if we look closely at the ways the human body adapts to new environments, a subtler possibility emerges. With time, the chrononaut could become something quietly extraordinary. A traveller who carries the strengths of multiple eras within their biology. This transformation does not happen all at once. It begins in small places, places most people never think about. Inside the respiratory system, in the beating of the heart, in the tiny decisions made by enzymes, hormones, and cells every moment of the day. Imagine a chrononaut who has spent weeks or months living in an ancient world where the air is heavy with moisture and rich with oxygen. At first, their lungs would feel confused, working too hard or too little as they try to understand the atmosphere's density. But over time, the tissues lining the airways might grow stronger, more flexible, adjusting to the way ancient air flows. Blood vessels within the lungs could widen slightly to make use of the abundance of oxygen. The body would learn to draw nourishment from each breath with the ease of creatures that once thrived in that era. Now imagine the same traveller stepping into a future where the air is thin, where the biology of plants has shifted so quietly over millennia that even the scent of the breeze feels different. Their body would adjust again, lungs expanding a little more deeply, the diaphragm strengthening, the heart becoming more efficient at carrying oxygen through the blood. These adaptations would not erase the changes from the ancient era. They would layer on top of them, creating a respiratory system that understands many worlds. Then there is the matter of metabolism. In every era, food comes with its own chemistry, shaped by climate and evolution. A chrononaut who has eaten the tough fibres of prehistoric plants, endured the nutrient density of ancient fruits, or navigated the engineered precision of future foods will, over time, train their digestive system to be more flexible. Enzymes, those tiny craftsmen of digestion, may begin to switch more easily between breaking down one kind of nutrient and another. The microbiome may become a mosaic, an ecosystem that remembers multiple centuries. With each adjustment, the chrononaut becomes someone who can draw strength from sources that would challenge ordinary bodies. The circadian rhythm also learns to adjust. The chrononaut's internal clock, which once clung stubbornly to the time of their original era, slowly grows more fluid. It begins recognizing new patterns of light and darkness, new sequences of temperature, new rhythms of local life. Over months, the traveller learns to fall asleep under skies that belong to entirely different epochs. Their body becomes a keeper of multiple dawns. This flexibility extends to the mind. The brain, with its astonishing capacity for reshaping itself, begins creating new pathways to interpret unfamiliar languages, landscapes, sounds, and social rhythms. A chrononaut might develop a calm resilience from witnessing the world at such a distance from their own life. They may carry an unusual patience, a tolerance for ambiguity, a gentle ability to observe without expecting the world to behave according to their old rules. Over time, the chrononaut acquires traits that would seem almost unreal to ordinary eyes. They might move with a kind of practiced steadiness, shaped by learning to walk across terrains formed by climates separated by tens of thousands of years. Their breathing might feel more measured, trained by multiple atmospheres. Their immune system might become wiser, recognizing patterns of microbial life from more than one age. None of these changes are dramatic. The chrononaut does not become a different species. They do not grow new organs or sprout fantastical abilities. Instead, they become a subtle blend of adaptations, a body that has learned to speak more than one biological language. Imagine a traveller standing at the edge of an ancient forest, breathing deeply, feeling the slight weight of moist air settle into their lungs. Their heart beats with a calm that belongs partly to the present and partly to the centuries they have crossed. Their mind interprets the world with a widened perspective, shaped by moments lived in more than one history. They are, in essence, someone who carries their own morning light inside them, a kind of internal guiding rhythm that persists even when the world's version of morning is unfamiliar. That inner light, rooted in adaptation, memory and resilience, becomes the chrononaut's anchor. But the transformation does not only occur physically. There is a quiet psychological shift as well. When someone has witnessed the world in different forms, before roads were built, before cities rose, before certain species disappeared, or after landscapes have changed beyond recognition, their understanding of humanity deepens. They see themselves not just as someone belonging to a particular era, but as part of a much larger tapestry. Even simple acts take on new meaning. Drinking water from a stream that once fed ancient forests connects them to life that has long since vanished. Walking through the soft dust of a future avenue, shaped by technologies they cannot name, reminds them that humanity continues, adapts, evolves. The chrononaut becomes a bridge, one who understands how fragile and yet how resilient the human story truly is, and in this bridging, they discover something profound. The body, for all its vulnerability, possesses an astonishing capacity to survive across time. With every adaptation, with every small shift in biology, with every recalibrated rhythm, the chrononaut becomes not a stranger to the era they enter, but a quiet witness, shaped by many worlds, woven into the fabric of more than one moment in history. They become a traveller, not only through time, but through the possibilities of what a human body can learn to be. When we imagine time travel, the mind often drifts toward glowing portals, humming machines and brilliant flashes of light. But for a chrononaut, the traveller who must actually endure the journey, technology means something quieter, more intimate, and far more personal. It is not merely about moving through time, but about surviving the changes that time brings. The machinery that carries the traveller may hum with futuristic elegance, but the true challenge is protecting the human body, with all its vulnerability and tenderness, from eras it was never meant to inhabit. Long before the chrononaut takes their first step into another century, the body must be prepared. Not through harsh modifications or full reinvention, but through careful enhancements that gently support the systems most likely to falter. Engineers and scientists would have to ask, How does one help the body stay steady when the world's heartbeat no longer matches the traveller's own? One of the first answers might lie in stabilising the circadian rhythm, the internal clock that struggles most intensely in foreign eras. Imagine a wearable device, not bulky or mechanical, but soft and subtle, like a band of warm light resting against the skin. This device could read the traveller's hormone levels and gently release cues, soft pulses of warmth, faint shifts of vibration that help guide the body into a new pattern of day and night. It would not force the body to obey. Instead, it would teach it new rhythms the way a parent guides a child's hand through a difficult piece of writing. Then there are the systems that help manage breathing. The Chrononaut might encounter atmospheres richer or thinner than they have ever known, laced with particles their lungs have never practiced greeting. Technology can become a kind of second set of lungs, not replacing the real ones, but helping them. Picture a collar or lightweight chest piece that samples the surrounding air, gently ionizing particles or filtering out microbial signatures before they reach the lungs. Inside the device are tiny mechanical structures that work like miniature forests, capturing what the traveller does not yet understand while letting familiar air flow through. None of this feels like armour, it feels like guidance. For deeper biological challenges, like how cells respond to new pressures or how DNA behaves under unfamiliar radiation, technology must be even more subtle. A chrononaut might wear ultra-thin patches on their skin, infused with smart materials that register changes in radiation or stress. Instead of emitting alarms, these patches release soft biochemical whispers, tiny molecules that the body recognizes as signals for repair, calm, or protection. They do not override the traveller's biology, they encourage it, the same way a gentle hand on a shoulder can steady a trembling breath. There may even be internal systems that accompany the traveller, though nothing invasive or frightening. Imagine a microscopic network of artificial helpers, no larger than dust motes, flowing quietly with the bloodstream. These helpers could detect small marks on DNA, the kinds we imagined earlier as faint folds in the pages of a book. When they find these marks, they offer assistance, not rewriting anything, not changing identity, but helping ensure the body's natural repair systems are never overwhelmed by the confusion of another era. Engineers might call these helpers adaptive microsupports. But to the chrononaut, they would feel like an extra dose of resilience, a quiet promise that the body will not have to face the challenges of temporal travel alone. Beyond the inside of the body, the traveller's suit becomes a kind of mobile home, an environment that can gently buffer the transition from one century to another. Not a bulky, rigid shell, but a flexible garment woven from fabrics that respond to temperature, pressure, and chemical composition. The suit could tighten slightly in thin air to support breathing, warm itself in ancient cold, cool the body in future heat waves, or filter toxins the chrononaut has never encountered. More importantly, it could act as a tutor for the body. When the chrononaut's environment becomes drastically different, thicker air, sudden gusts of future wind, pollen swirling in prehistoric forests, the suit could soften those extremes. Over time, as the traveller grows more adapted, the suit would withdraw its support little by little, allowing the body to learn, to adjust, and to discover its own strengths. But technology does not only protect the physical body, it also protects the mind. A chrononaut stepping into a distant era may feel the weight of dislocation, the sense that their identity is stretched between centuries, or that their memories and perceptions no longer align smoothly. Here, technology can serve not as a shield, but as a companion. Perhaps the traveller carries a device that plays calming patterns, the sound of waves from their home era, or the steady thrum of a familiar engine, or even a quiet hum tailored to the traveller's own heartbeat. These gentle cues remind the mind that it still has a home, even when the world outside looks impossibly strange. In moments of deep uncertainty, a small projection or holographic interface might appear. Nothing loud, nothing intrusive, just a soft display that explains the environment, highlights safe foods, or shows the changing chemistry of the air. The goal is not to overwhelm the traveller with information, but to soothe the mind with clarity. And then there are the tools that help the chrononaut learn from the era itself. Devices that translate ancient languages or decode future gestures. Sensors that map unseen microbes and share that information with the immune system's artificial partners. These tools do not isolate the traveller from the world, they invite them into it, bridging the gap between eras so the chrononaut can meet each moment with respect and understanding. Perhaps the most profound technology, however, is the one designed not to protect the body from time, but to help it remember where it has been. Imagine a device that records emotional states, biological rhythms, even the subtle shifts in the traveller's perception as they move from one era to another. When the chrononaut returns home, this device would help them understand the ways they have changed, offering gentle reassurance that adaptation does not diminish identity, it enriches it. In the end, the most meaningful technologies are not those that overpower nature, but those that collaborate with it. The chrononaut's tools are not weapons against time, they are companions, guiding the body with kindness instead of force, teaching it how to breathe, how to repair, how to rest, and how to belong in worlds that were never meant to welcome it. Through this collaboration, the traveller becomes something remarkable, not a fragile visitor struggling against the centuries, but a resilient human being supported by compassion woven into machinery, and by machinery shaped with deep respect for the human spirit. There is a kind of wisdom in stillness, a wisdom older than language, older than humanity, older even than the forests and mountains of our world. You can see it in the way certain animals retreat from winter, slowing their breath, cooling their bodies, lowering themselves gently into a season of sleep that carries them across months of cold without hunger or fear. Bears curl into caves and let their heartbeats drift into a softer rhythm. Turtles sink into mud at the bottom of ponds, suspended between moments. Even tiny insects wrap themselves in delicate shells of ice, surrendering to a quiet that is not death but a long, deep pause. Cryosleep, hibernation guided by technology, is humanity's attempt to learn from that ancient wisdom. For a chrononaut, it becomes something even more profound. It is not merely a way to cross long distances, it is a cushion between eras, a gentle buffer that protects the body when time itself becomes harsh. Imagine a traveller preparing for a leap so great that their biology cannot easily follow. Perhaps they are heading into a world where radiation is stronger, or where gravity shifts in ways the body is not ready to withstand. Perhaps they are about to cross centuries in a single heartbeat, a journey so abrupt that their internal clocks would lose all sense of rhythm. In such moments, the chrononaut turns toward the stillness of cryosleep, an engineered winter, a designed quiet. The process does not feel like closing a door. It feels like sinking into warm, heavy water. As the traveller lies down, the chamber around them dims into soft shades of blue or gold. Sensors whisper instructions to the body, inviting it gently downward into a slower pace. Cooling gel or fine mist might settle across the skin, lowering temperature in degrees so small and gentle that the body cannot distinguish the process from falling asleep on a cool night. Inside, the heart begins to slow, not abruptly, not frighteningly, but with the grace of a musician easing a song toward its final notes. The breath becomes shallow, then steady. Metabolism quiets. Cells shift into a mode that prioritizes protection rather than activity. The body draws inward, conserving energy, entering a state where damage from radiation becomes less likely, and stresses from environmental shocks can be endured. In this state, the chrononaut is not frozen. They are resting more deeply than any ordinary sleep could offer. The closest comparison is the hibernation of animals, but even that is only an approximation. Bears do not truly sleep through winter. They drift in and out, their bodies carefully managing every calorie. insects slow their chemistry until it becomes barely measurable. Cryosleep takes this natural instinct and refines it into something more controlled, not forcing the body, but guiding it. While the chrononaut rests in this quiet place, time becomes something strange. Their body ages at a gentle pace, far slower than in waking life. The processes that would normally cause wear, oxidation, misfolding of proteins, the small accumulations of stress, are held in suspension. The traveller drifts through hours or centuries without feeling their weight. When they awaken, their body may have moved forward only a few days in its own rhythms, even if the world outside has changed beyond recognition. There is something deeply tender about this. Cryosleep gives the chrononaut a way to cross eras without losing themselves, without burdening their cells with the shock of sudden change. It preserves the softness of the body in the face of centuries. Of course, awakening from cryosleep is its own kind of journey. It does not come in a jolt or with confusion. Instead, the chamber warms by fractions. A faint glow touches the eyelids. Signals rise through the body, coaxing metabolism back to life. The heart stirs, then beats more firmly. Breath deepens. Muscles regain their tone. The world around the traveller resolves from a blur into shapes, and then into meaning. But something subtle remains from the experience, the sense of having passed through a long, gentle dream. A dream without images, without story, just a feeling of floating between moments. Some chrononauts might describe it as drifting through a deep fog. Others might say it feels like waking from a nap in a room that remembers a different season. And when they step into their new era, their body moves with a kind of refreshed calm. The air feels new, but not overwhelming. The gravity feels different, but manageable. Their internal clocks are still working to understand the world, but they are not shocked or frantic. Cryosleep has given them a grace period, a gentler introduction to the strangeness of time. In longer journeys, cryosleep becomes more than a tool. It becomes a companion, a place of retreat during moments of fatigue or emotional weight, a way to reset when the world's rhythm becomes too loud or too foreign, a reminder that the body, like the Earth's creatures, survives best when allowed to rest deeply. There is also a psychological comfort in knowing that nature itself teaches the technique. The chrononaut does not feel like they are doing something unnatural. Instead, they feel connected to every creature that has ever waited out a storm, every animal that has curled into the stillness of winter. They join a lineage of beings who understood instinctively that survival sometimes requires pausing until the world becomes gentle again. Through cryosleep, time becomes something that the chrononaut can move through softly rather than something that rushes past them. And perhaps in this quiet, borrowed stillness, the traveller learns an unexpected truth. Survival is not always about endurance or strength. Sometimes it is about surrendering to rest, trusting the slow rhythms of the body, and allowing stillness itself to carry you across the unknown. There is a moment, near the end of every long journey, when the traveller begins to sense the distance they have crossed, not in miles or in years, but in the subtle changes within themselves. For a chrononaut, that moment arrives quietly. Perhaps it comes while watching an unfamiliar sunset cast colours never seen in their home century. Perhaps it comes while walking past plants that belong to a future climate, or hearing the calls of animals that lived long before humanity learned to write. In that still moment, the traveller understands something profound. They are no longer shaped only by the time they were born into. They have become a person touched by many eras. This understanding brings with it a gentle question, one that cannot be answered quickly. What does it mean to remain human when you have lived in more than one history? At first, the question feels philosophical, but as the chrononaut begins to reflect on the layers of adaptation in their body and mind, the question becomes more intimate. They remember the way their lungs learned to breathe different atmospheres, how their sleep cycle adapted to strange rhythms of light, how their immune system cautiously befriended microbes from times unknown. They remember how their perceptions stretched to meet new cues, how their sense of balance recalibrated, how their cells rewrote quiet stories in response to new pressures. None of these changes erased who they were, but each one added something, an extra thread in the tapestry of their being. The Chrononaut has become a mosaic of times, an echo of many worlds, and with this transformation comes the ethical weight of travelling between eras. For every small change the traveller experiences inside their own body, there is the possibility of a small change they leave behind in the world they visit. A microbe on their skin might drift into an ecosystem that has never encountered it. A spore from an ancient plant might cling to their clothing and return with them to the present. Even their presence in a past century might alter a sequence of events in ways they never intended. Such possibilities make time travel feel less like an adventure and more like a fragile responsibility. To enter another era is to step into a living story that continues long after the traveller leaves, and to return home is to carry with them both memories and consequences, some visible and others far too small to see. Technology can help, of course. Filters that keep microscopic hitchhikers from unfolding where they shouldn't. Careful protocols to separate timelines like clean rooms. But technology can only do so much. The Chrononaut must learn to move gently through history, with the same care one would use when handling a fragile artifact. Every step becomes an act of respect. Every breath becomes a silent promise to honour the delicate interconnectedness of time. Yet the deepest ethical questions arise not from the environment, but from the traveller's own transformation. If a Chrononaut adapts to multiple eras, grows stronger lungs, more flexible rhythms, or more resilient cells, what does that mean for their place in the society they return to? Do they remain the same kind of human as those they left behind? Or do they become something slightly different? A version of humanity shaped by experiences no one else has lived? And if technology can support the Chrononaut, strengthening their biology, tempering their senses, protecting them from ancient or future environments, at what point does that support drift into enhancement? At what point does the traveller become someone engineered not just to survive time, but to thrive within it? Some might say these changes enrich the human story, that to adapt across centuries is to understand our species in a fuller way. Others might worry that such changes create distance, an invisible line between those who have walked through time and those who have not. Still, others might wonder whether the Chrononaut risks losing something essential by becoming too comfortable in places they were never meant to be. But perhaps the truth is gentler than all these fears. Identity is not a fixed stone. It is a river, shaped by the landscapes it travels through, carrying traces of every place it has passed. A Chrononaut does not lose their humanity by flowing through more landscapes. They simply gather more stories in their waters. Their body does not betray their humanness by adapting. It demonstrates the flexibility that has allowed humans to survive since the beginning. Even the enhancements that support them, those soft devices that stabilize their rhythms, the patches that help their cells repair, the quiet machines that filter new air, are not efforts to transcend humanity. They are extensions of the compassion humans show one another, tools made to keep someone safe, instruments built to honour life. If the Chrononaut becomes more than human, it is not through power, but through perspective. They have walked paths across time that few others ever will. They have seen the earth in its youth and in its possibility. They have felt how fragile the body is, yet how determined it becomes when supported with care. They have witnessed the strange generosity of nature, which allows life to persist under conditions both harsh and gentle. And in returning home, whether that home is the present or some future era, the Chrononaut carries all of this with a quiet, steady grace. They sit beneath a familiar sky and notice how the stars seem older or younger than they once thought. They walk through their own streets and feel the subtle echo of other landscapes beneath their feet. They breathe air that smells ordinary again, yet layered with memories of oxygen-rich forests or thin futuristic breezes. They listen to voices of friends and family and hear, in their cadences, the continuity of humanity across every age. Home does not feel smaller, it feels deeper, and in that depth comes a final realization. To travel through time is not to become something other than human. It is to become someone who has seen how vast humanness truly is. The Chrononaut remains human not by resisting their changes, but by embracing the gentle truth that growth, adaptation, and resilience are part of the human story itself. They have not left their humanity behind. They have carried it across centuries, allowing it to stretch, evolve, and bloom. And as they stand once more in the time they call home, they embody something quietly profound. A reminder that the human spirit is not bound by years or eras, but guided by curiosity, humility, and the endless desire to understand the world, no matter where or when they stand.